In the dark, quiet corners of her home, Rani would hide pieces of bread in her undergarments, sneaking off to the bathroom to eat in secret. Desperation clawed at her heart as she began to imagine the unthinkable, thoughts of exacting revenge on her in-laws. Once, her husband, in a drunken rage, dumped a bucket of urine on her. Shattered, she crafted a noose and prepared to end her life. One night, he came home drunk and assaulted her, burning her with cigarettes, ripping out her hair, leaving her bruised and broken. That night, Rani felt completely defeated. She made a painful decision. After feeding her child and putting them to sleep, she would end her suffering. She tied the rope around the fan but, in her haste, forgot to lock the door. Her husband walked in and, seeing her preparing to hang herself, simply turned and left, closing the door behind him without a word. Hello viewers. Today, we bring you the powerful and inspiring true story of Rani, a young woman from a small village in Rajasthan, India, who forced to marry at the age of 14. Let's watch full story of Rani.
Rani was born into a tribal family, the youngest daughter in a small village with few resources. Television, newspapers, and basic amenities were unheard of. The village had only a school up to grade 10, and her family made a modest living, working as day laborers in rice fields, or rolling biddies, handmade cigarettes. Although most village families didn't bother sending their children to school, Rani was one of the lucky few. Her parents were motivated, not by dreams of education, but by the small scholarship amount provided for tribal children. Her schooling continued, and when Rani passed her 10th grade board exams, her father felt a sense of pride, though he hadn't planned any future for her beyond basic schooling. With a modest school 4 kilometers away, Rani continued to study, walking back and forth when they couldn't afford the small fare for public transport. Rani developed an interest in the arts, dreaming of becoming a lawyer. She'd seen lawyers on TV in black coats and imagined herself standing confidently, representing those who needed a voice. This dream gave her the motivation to keep going. But then unexpectedly a marriage proposal arrived. The proposal was from a prominent family, well-educated and of high status. Her father was astonished. Why would such a wealthy, educated family propose to us simple laborers? Without questioning further or investigating the family, he accepted the proposal, certain that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. When Rani expressed her hesitation about marriage, especially with her dream of becoming a lawyer, her father dismissed her concerns. He said, "Proposals like this don't come every day, especially from such a well-respected family." Even her future father-in-law chimed in saying, "We recently lost our daughter, and she too had dreamed of studying law. We want to fulfill her dream through Rani." Hearing this, her father felt reassured. They didn't have the means to send Rani to law school themselves, so he saw this as a rare opportunity for her future. Without consulting her further, Rani's engagement was arranged the very next day. Her father didn't even visit the groom's family to check the living conditions or meet the family properly. For Rani, this engagement was crushing. She had dreams of wearing a black lawyer's robe, arguing cases and standing tall in a courtroom. She tried to reason with her father, saying she wasn't ready for marriage, but no one listened. Her engagement was finalized without her consent. A month later, Rani's wedding took place. At only 16, she barely understood what marriage meant. India's legal marriage age for girls is 21, yet in many rural areas child marriages persist, especially in regions like Rajasthan. As she bid farewell to her family, she wept bitterly, feeling as though she was being sent to prison. Her father, who she believed would protect her dreams, was sending her away to a life she didn't want. Arriving at her new home in her in-laws' household, Rani was immediately given tasks in the kitchen. She was shocked by the household rules. Written in bold letters on the kitchen wall were instructions: clean the area first, then cook. Unsure, she assumed these were old rules for hired help and got to work, completing all the tasks asked of her. Her innocence and eagerness to please made her overlook many red flags. That evening, her in-laws introduced her to a set of harsh rules. 1. She was forbidden from sitting at the dining table with the family. 2. She couldn't watch television. 3. She wasn't allowed to laugh out loud. 4. She had to keep her head down and hands folded behind her back while speaking. Even her meals were regulated. She was to eat last only if there was food left. That night, when she finally sat down, there was no food left for her. Following the rules, she went to bed hungry. Later that night, her husband returned home and immediately began yelling, questioning her about why she hadn't cleaned his grandmother's bed. Before she could respond, he slapped her twice, then dragged her to the second floor. Confused and frightened, Rani followed him upstairs, where she found an elderly woman lying bedridden in soiled sheets. Her husband yelled, "You're supposed to clean grandmother's bed daily, understood?" Terrified, Rani nodded and set to work cleaning her grandmother-in-law's soiled bed. After an hour, she returned to the bedroom exhausted, only to find her husband waiting for her. Without asking how she was or whether she had eaten, he forced himself on her, ignoring her tears and pleas. To him, Rani's feelings were irrelevant. She was simply there to serve him. Rani's marriage had turned out to be nothing like the promises made by her father-in-law. She had dreamed of becoming a lawyer, but those hopes were shattered as she found herself trapped in a life that felt worse than prison. Her daily routine was grueling. Cook breakfast, clean the entire house, tend to her grandmother-in-law's needs, prepare lunch, wash endless piles of laundry, iron clothes, and finally cook dinner. In her own family home, Rani was used to helping with household chores, but she had been given food, rest, and peace. Here in her in-laws' house, she was treated more like a servant. She wasn't even guaranteed food. If there was nothing left after the family had eaten, she would go hungry. And the one thing that was never in short supply? The physical abuse from her husband. He would hit her often, without explanation, leaving her to wonder what she had done wrong. Rani was too afraid to question him. Desperation forced her to find small ways to survive. When she cooked, she would secretly make 2 extra pieces of bread and hide them in her undergarments, sneaking into the bathroom to eat them later. Her life felt even worse than prison, and with no one willing to help, she saw no escape. She wished someone would take her back to her parents' home, but nobody cared to listen. One day, unexpectedly, her father visited. Seeing him, Rani broke down in tears, all her hidden pain rising to the surface. Her husband had beaten her just that morning, but her in-laws wouldn't let her speak to her father alone. Finally, she managed to whisper, pleading with him to take her home. Her father was reluctant, but when she insisted, he finally said, "Fine, be ready. I'll take you home when I come back from work." For Rani, those words felt like a promise of rebirth. She dreamed of escaping her current life and returning to her family. For the first time since her wedding, she felt joy. She imagined the freedom of going home, no longer having to work like a servant. But by nightfall, her joy turned to despair. Her father didn't return for her. That night, Rani felt a deep sting of betrayal, realizing that no one would save her. Her hope of escape had vanished, and she accepted that this miserable life was her fate. She fell into deeper despair, her mental state worsening each day. Her husband, who spent most nights away with other women, would return only to vent his frustrations on her. He showed no mercy, often leaving bruises on her face. Rani's mental health deteriorated, and dark thoughts started haunting her. What if I just put rat poison in their food and end this suffering? But she hesitated, fearing the consequences and the police. Gradually, her health began to fail. For days, she continued working despite being unwell, to avoid more beatings. Eventually, her condition worsened, and she asked her sister-in-law, a medical student, for medicine. But her sister-in-law ignored her request, delaying for days. By the time she finally gave Rani some medication, it was too late. Rani collapsed shortly after taking it, slipping into unconsciousness. When Rani opened her eyes, she found herself lying in a bed at a government hospital, alone. She had been there for days without any family or support. The doctors informed her that she'd suffered a reaction to some unknown medication and, to her shock, told her she was pregnant. Her body had grown weak, with her weight dropping to a mere 36 kilos. Just months ago, before her marriage, she had been a healthy 55 kilos. In desperation, she asked the son of a fellow patient to write a letter to her father, explaining her situation. Days passed, and still no one from her in-laws' family came to check on her. Finally, on the 5th day, her father arrived and took her back to her parental home. Once back, Rani poured her heart out to her family, explaining all the abuse and hardships she had suffered. She told her father that she didn't want to return to her in-laws. But her father insisted, "Daughter, you can stay here until they call you back. But when they do, you'll have to return. After all, married women belong with their husbands, not at their parents' house." Her family urged her to give it time, believing that things would improve once she had a child. Realizing her father would not support her decision to stay, Rani eventually went back to her in-laws, holding on to the hope that her situation might improve after her child was born. As her pregnancy progressed, she received no special care or nutrition. She managed only by eating raw vegetables like carrots and cucumbers when she could. Her mother sent her some dried fruits and ghee to nourish her, but even in her condition, she was forced to do all the household chores. Finally, Rani gave birth to a son. However, nothing changed in her household. Her husband's beatings continued, leaving her with no peace or comfort. When her son was about 10 months old, her husband came home drunk one night and subjected her to brutal abuse, burning her skin with cigarettes, pulling her hair and hitting her repeatedly. Broken and exhausted, Rani made up her mind to end her life. She fed her child, put him to sleep, and tied a rope to the ceiling fan. But in her rush, she forgot to lock the door. Just then her husband walked in, saw her preparing to hang herself, and shockingly did nothing. He merely closed the door and left, as though her life meant nothing to him. At that moment, Rani had an epiphany. Why am I ending my life for a man who doesn't care? Why should I leave my son in the hands of someone so cruel? She untied the rope, determined to live for herself and her child. Rani gathered her belongings, took her son, and went to her friend Sheila's home. Sheila had been a domestic worker at Rani's in-laws' house before her marriage, and the two had become friends. Sheila welcomed her and gave her a place to stay. Rani began working alongside Sheila, earning a modest income of about 1,000 rupees per month, which she used to cover essentials including food, milk, and her son's needs. Wanting to improve her situation, Rani asked Sheila to help her find more work, and she resumed her studies, eventually passing her 12th grade exams and enrolling in college. Despite occasional visits from her husband, who would assault her or forcefully impose himself, Rani continued to push forward. Soon she became pregnant again, and this time, Sheila was there to support her through the pregnancy. Rani gave birth to a daughter, and her mother even came from the village to help, filling their small space with warmth and support. With her mother's help, Rani had more time for work and studies. She started doing cleaning work at a beauty salon, learning beauty skills on the side. Within 3 months, she'd gained enough skill to work as an assistant, earning a small salary that helped support her family. Although money was still tight, Rani's perseverance paid off when she graduated with honors, a significant achievement given the hardships she'd endured. Her success inspired everyone who knew her, and she found renewed encouragement. It was then that someone told her about a newspaper called Employment News, which listed job opportunities. Rani began reading it regularly, and soon saw a job posting for a police inspector position in the Rajasthan police. The salary caught her attention. She could finally build a secure future for her children. She decided to prepare for the exam, not knowing that becoming a police inspector would bring her both respect and authority. For Rani, it was about financial security for her children. Living in Sheila's small house, Rani often studied on a cot set up outside on the street. One day, her mother called her inside to feed her baby. When Rani returned, she found that a street dog had urinated on her study books. Her heart sank as replacing the book would cost 400 rupees, an amount she didn't have. It was a crisp December evening, and the chill in the air carried with it the warmth of the festive season. The streets were alive with the spirit of Christmas. In India, It's a common sight during this time of year. Santa Claus parades weaving through neighborhoods, surrounded by groups of children and adults alike. The air resonated with music, laughter, and the rhythmic beats of drums as people sang and danced in celebration. Santa, flanked by his joyous entourage, distributed chocolates and small gifts, spreading cheer wherever he went. Financially well-off families often stopped the procession, offering tea and snacks to Santa and his group, adding a touch of generosity to the festive camaraderie. This evening, the cheerful parade passed by Rani's house. She heard the drums, the music, and the happy voices outside. Standing at the doorway for a brief moment, her heart tugged at old memories. The lively scene transported her back to her childhood in the village, where Christmas had been magical in its simplicity. Every year, Rani and the neighborhood children would come together to make a Christmas tree. They decorated it with handmade ornaments and garlands, their laughter filling the cold winter evenings. Wearing Santa hats, the children would parade around the village, clanging plates and singing loudly, immersed in the excitement of welcoming Christmas. The entire village joined in, creating a celebration that, though modest, felt boundless in its joy. Despite her longing to watch the Santa parade outside, Rani forced herself to stay focused on her books. Her mother and Sheila, however, stepped outside, enjoying the music, stunts, and dancing performed by the passing procession. Night came, and with it the promise of a new day. It was Christmas. The air the next morning was filled with excitement and celebration. People wore new clothes, visiting each other's homes to exchange greetings and sweets. Yet, Rani remained immersed in her studies. Her upcoming exam weighed heavily on her mind. It was her one chance to change her future. By the afternoon, Sheila and her mother took the children to the church to celebrate. Rani planned to join them during the prayer service, but decided to stay home for now, pouring her energy into preparing for her exam. Rani's life, however, had taken a turn she had never imagined. While the world outside her window was filled with joy, music, and the festive spirit, her home became a battlefield of unimaginable humiliation and cruelty. Her estranged husband, who had long abandoned her emotionally and physically, took advantage of her solitude that evening. Without warning, he entered the house uninvited. His intentions were clear, and his actions brutal. He assaulted her with physical force, tearing away at whatever light of hope still flickered within her. Rani neither resisted nor cried. She endured in silence, clinging to the faint hope that his violence would end quickly, that he would leave her in peace. But his cruelty did not end with the physical abuse. In a final act of inhuman degradation, he urinated into a bucket and poured it over her, leaving her drenched in humiliation. The festive spirit of Christmas, so alive outside her home, was extinguished within these walls. Her estranged husband walked out, as if his despicable act had been some twisted triumph, leaving Rani shattered and humiliated. Yet this was not the end of Rani's story. Her journey is one of courage, resilience, and unyielding determination in the face of unimaginable odds. To uncover what happens next in Rani's story, subscribe to Stories Beyond the Taj, and join us as we explore her journey. Will Rani find the strength to stand against her husband's cruelty, or will circumstances overpower her resolve? Can she overcome the odds and reclaim her dreams, or will life push her further into despair? Stay tuned to witness her fight for freedom, dignity, and the future she deserves. Hit the subscribe button now and follow us for more gripping and inspiring tales of resilience from India, the world's most populated country.